Thank you, Carrie. I wanted to thank you all for coming here. We stand between you and lunch. We're going to present for about 45, 50 minutes and then have some times for questions and answers. This is being recorded, and what we're going to talk about today is doing more with GIS. And what this really focuses on is people at different levels of organizations, in the field, analysts, people that are doing directors of operations, need to be able to share information in different ways and be able to put information in context. And there are a couple of challenges that are in the way. One is that systems procurement is based on your currently understood requirements, and this ends up limiting the ability to react to quickly evolving threats. Also, this information invariably gets put into silos. They may be silos of excellence that provide very robust user experiences, but from a data management and data sharing standpoint, becomes very problematic. And then these different controls, bless you, these different controls have different ideas, groups have different ideas about how to control, share, and safeguard information. So for a field operator, being able to get to the information they need for them to be able to disseminate information really quickly for what they've observed in the field. If you want to piss off an analyst, let them know that because of infrastructure problems, the intelligence product they worked on or the banking report they worked on is not going to be seen by people is a big problem. And then lastly, for the ops director who's bringing in all of this information, getting situational awareness in order to make a pivot, they want to be able to react very, very quickly and bring this all together. So a few weeks ago, I saw a presentation from somebody from Johnson Space Flight Center explaining 9 dimensions of the universe. And it starts out with 1 dimension, and of course 2 dimension would be X and Y. And they're saying if there was a 2-dimensional world, one, there's things that you can't do. You can't really ingest liquids, whether they're beer or water, because there's no place to put it. There is no inside, there's no outside, there's no before or after. And in fact, a 2-dimensional being really couldn't even imagine dimensions above it because everything is in those XY axis. And so we're 3-dimensional people, and we actually sort of delude ourselves into understanding a 4th dimension, time. But really what we do is we break that up into segments of time, snapshots, and we actually believe that time moves in one direction and that there's only one massive timeline in the universe. And this is about as heady as this presentation is going to get. But I started thinking about that, and I look at what the analysts that use Esri Arcgis and use MarkLogic, that work on national security, public safety, financial, healthcare problems, and they need to be able to see beyond those dimensions that they typically get to see in the data that they're working with. So they need to be able to see beyond time and space. And what we really want to be able to see is consequence, how things are connected. So you'll have people and events. You'll have, you want to know the outcomes from them. You want to put that in context of space and time, and also understand how they are connected. So from a data perspective, this is really hard because it's, and the clicker's hard too. The data's in different shapes. It's in different systems, as I said, controlled by different organizations. It means different things to different people and organizations. So in yesterday's presentation, David Gorbet was just saying, take something really simple as F_name and first name. You have to be able to resolve that. But as you go from communities of interest that are more far-flung, there's actually a great deal of difference in how people describe things. And it's volatile. One of the things, there's almost an inverse relationship between the criticality of a problem that an analyst is working on and how long that data is good for. And they tend to be very volatile. In a critical police investigation, there might be one gnarly data set that you have to spend a lot of time to get sense out of it. And if your ETL processes are really precious, it's a woeful waste of time and money. So how do you help analysts see beyond? Each of you may be supporting analysts that have to look at banking, healthcare, intelligence, oil and gas, business content in order to be able to derive insights. And it comes in national security, law enforcement, and industry all the time. So one example, when we were starting to put this together, we were looking back at the San Bernardino shooting, which happened, San Bernardino and Redlands, where Esri is headquartered, actually pretty proximate to each other. And one of the articles that came out in January, mouthful of a headline, tries to figure out what San Bernardino attackers did during the 18-minute window after the shooting. I actually selected this before the whole Apple trying to get the iPhone decrypted and everything like that. But believe me, that 18-minute window was a big part of what they were trying to do. So you look at that, and one of the things that the newspaper article had was, well, it had pictures of the attackers, and it had pictures of where the attack happened, the actual government facility, and then they had this box. They just drew this box. It was good newspaper graphic. And you look at the box, and you can derive that box through algebra. The car is going at this many miles an hour. It has 18 minutes. The shapes of the roads are like this. So you're going to derive, we're going to make the box this way. Maybe they had access to signal data. Maybe they were able to get cellular towers, and when that was happening, it might look at roughly the same shape. But that's the problem space, and immediately you start looking at, okay, got it, spatiotemporal. Time and space, we're going to try to solve this problem. What did they do during that time? The other thing in the article is if you just read the article and we'll pretend, intelligence reports and witness reports are not the same as journalism, but you start reading that article and you realize what helps you lift off of just seeing time and space is that these attackers worked at a place, they traveled to, they messaged, they were married, they drove to. Each of these semantic relationships starts putting information in context. Another example was the taxi driver in DC that turned out to be a recruiter for Al-Qaeda via Al-Shabaab. And again, you look at the documentation that just journalists were creating. This was just picked out of online articles and print journalism, and you start seeing the relationships between that suspect, the organization that he's recruiting for, and the different organizations and the data sources that contain information about it. So what's clearly needed is a way to put things in geospatial, temporal, and semantic context. So when you do this, you're able to drive more analysis and less time finding and reshaping data. You can do what if you're able to swap out the relationships, if you're able to do inference and do hypotheticals that say, let's say for a moment that these two people were connected, or if they did go here, what else would they have been able to do? It's also, you're able to, if you express this information as entities and objects, and by the way, when we talk about entities and objects, we just mean high-level business concepts that need to be persisted before the moment, that are probably adorned with attributes that come from multiple systems. And then you might want to attach sort of leaf-level attributes like pedigree, provenance, time span, validity, and in some cases security to each of those attributes. So they can create, share, relate, and find the highest value data that's there. But there's a few problems, as I indicated at the beginning. there's IT proliferation, there's data silos, and multiple communities of interest. Over the last year and a half, 2 years, I've met with government and law enforcement organizations around the world, probably in police alone, probably 14 or 15 police forces. And they bought a record management system in 1999. They bought a case management system in 2003. They refreshed their laboratory information management system that tracks forensic data in 2006. Every time they bought that, they did an analysis of alternatives, they did a short list, they procured it, and the software generally did that which they expected it to do. The problem is that there are threats that are evolving so quickly that you're asking people to use data in unintended ways. In the police and national security world, you have mission threads like human smuggling and trafficking, counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, transnational organized crime. When you look at the information that's most meaningful to dealing with those challenges, the data comes in multiple shapes. So your first challenge is that the IT systems themselves proliferate. And typically the only answer is when they have a new mission, if there's new legislation that happens in a particular state or your enemy innovates, you typically want to solve the problem by buying more technology, and the cycle just ensues. You end up driving more data into silos. So in just an analytical world, you'll look at in geospatial, social media, statistical search, link analysis, this temporal products that are out there. In the government world, which is where I spend a lot of my time, not every one of these applications has its own database. Frequently, they have their own contractor. The contractor has its own program management office, or SPO, special project office. It's its own contract, and it is set up. The cards are stacked that each one of these will be its own silo. And the problem is that we've, in sort of a static period where you had a very predictable enemy, it was okay to have expertise in each one of these intelligence areas. Like you would have imagery experts and you'd have people that know signals. But really what we've learned in both the law enforcement, homeland security, and national security is that really these are all source problems. And you need expertise to be able to jump across these data types, these intelligence types that are kept in multiple locations and systems. So just like Joe, I have a picture of the cloud up there. And yes, it is mandatory to do that. But the reason why I put it up there is almost all of the organizations we're talking to are either doing data center consolidation or moving to a cloud stack behind the firewall. And most of them are just forklifting applications that were on bare metal, putting it in a VM or other Dockers or containers, and saying, voila, we now have the efficiency of the cloud. The problem is all of the non-recurring engineering costs to do this integration between systems hasn't been dealt with, and you haven't done anything with the operations and maintenance tail. So all of those efficiencies that you're hoping to get from the cloud will be elusive unless you're able to do that. You need a different kind of platform to be able to do it. So lastly, as an example of what we mean by the challenge of multiple communities of interest, and by the way, in no way, shape, or form are we being Pollyanna and saying that everybody should just share everything. That's certainly not our case. It's just that when you build systems, when you build solutions, you have to know from the very beginning that everybody is very proprietary about their stuff. It's almost like a George Carlin thing about their stuff. And it is reasonable that people, in this particular case, I'm looking at maritime security, that people working on safe ports and waterways or environmental protection or food or waterborne food sources would want the granularity of about what is surveilled in a particular bay, intelligence probably has really good maps. There might be sonar information about what kinds of ships are coming through in the signatures. But there needs to be a way to preserve originator control of that information and somehow live up to the need to share while safeguarding sources and methods. So MarkLogic and Esri have been working together for 5 years. There are organizations in the US government, in state and local in the US. We have common customers around the world that deal with these 3 issues constantly. And after working together in client-facing projects, we focused in on first in an area of intelligence operations. And there's a couple of reasons why. I've talked to them already. One is that it's an all-source intelligence focus. MarkLogic is a great platform for data that it comes in different shapes and needs to be expressed in different ways. So you might want to express it as a document, you might want to use linked data, and we wanted to be able to take advantage of that and work with communities that have that problem. Secondly, taking advantage of Esri's architecture and extensions to their architecture, we're able to create this seamless connection between GIS and enterprise data. And then lastly, to be able to take advantage of the GIS smarts that ArcGIS brings to the greater MarkLogic community, and then conversely be able to bring data types into ArcGIS that typically are hard to bring into GIS. So for example, entity types like people and organizations, events, and chronologies are just difficult to bring into a map because they're so dynamic. And again, they can be, the information about them can come from multiple sources. So we're also talking about objects and content visualized. You go.
Okay. Thanks, Billy. So before I start, is anyone familiar with Esri as a company? Okay. And that's usually what we get. We are a major player in the GIS industry. And our main focus is the second bullet. And when you look at that, it's this, okay, everyone wants to empower everyone with timely, accurate information. But the critical thing is really what we offer. And we offer what's called the Arcgis Platform. And for the Arcgis Platform, what we want to do is we want to allow or enable our users to run the things they need to run on desktop, on mobile, and on the server. So the way we do that is a few different ways. We have this integrated access point that allows us to access our data, which we would think of as like foundational data. So your maps, your points of interest, those things that you would get with the typical GIS. And at times when it makes sense to go to a business partner such as MarkLogic, we want to bring in that operational information that you wouldn't traditionally store in a GIS, but still be able to see that information on a map. And we do that by utilizing our platform to allow our users to not have to configure in solutions. So if I need an application on the web, I don't need to go handle or hire a developer to do that. We have custom applications for that. If I have individuals that are in a common operation picture or an ops center, we don't want to have them have this big SI thing that they have to go get a system integrator to configure that, and every single time something changes like a dot from red to blue, they have to go pay more money. So we want to empower the users on that end. But we also want to utilize our business partners to take advantage of our APIs and our SDKs. And that's what MarkLogic has done. So we have an example prototype called OBI. And what OBI does is allows people to have access to the MarkLogic database in the web. We utilize OBI by allowing them to utilize our feature service JavaScript API framework to connect that information. So when something happens in the OBI database, we're able to read that information out utilizing what we call Geo Event Server. It's an application that allows us to figure out what that stream of data is happening. We also utilize that to then populate that information back to the OBI or the MarkLogic database. What we don't want to do is we don't want to store data in two different locations. We want to access that information from anywhere, be able to visualize it, update it, or add that information to. So that's our concept. I'm going to show you some of the applications that we utilize and how this actually works. So we'll start by looking at a dashboard. This is an application that comes free with our Arcgis platform. It's called Operations Dashboard. And the idea is each of these individual points, sorry about that. So each of these individual boxes are widgets, and widgets allow us to understand something about our application. So in this scenario, let's go and think about this. We have the city of Monterey, and the city of Monterey is got multiple events happening every year. And on top of that, I have an intel center that is tracking these individuals we call the MLF. They're a terrorist group that we know that they're active in our area. And the operations center just wants to understand how they're affecting, what are they doing, what's happening. So the operations center is watching this. We have individuals in the field that are actually tracking these individuals, and they're sending updates. So what we can quickly do as an operations guy is I can say, where is this individual operating? So we have an individual that's an MLF part of this organization. It's actually in Sacramento. Or I have another individual that's in Sand City, and that's just north of Monterey. And then I have this individual in Monterey that's very active. And so what I'm doing is this is a widget that just allows me to click on that graph and populate that information and get that information into the map. As these reports come in from the field, or these reports are updated in maybe another intel organization, they get fed into my feed. So I get some basic information that's happening real time, so I don't have to wait for data ingestion to say, okay, this field report, then it gets moved to this database, and now my ops center has access to it. We input that information live, and we'll start to see this in a minute, but that information is critical to allow me to make decisions. Now, traditionally, when you see a presentation and using a technical application, you see no feature, you think, oh, it's broken. Those things we'll get to later on. Those are questions we're going to ask based on the scenario that we'll then populate on the fly. So then let's go and talk a little bit about OBI. So OBI is a web-based application that MarkLogic created as a prototype of how do you start to access it, how do you answer questions via the web of things in the MarkLogic database. So in this sense, what we have is we have these persons that we're tracking. So these persons are multiple individuals, and believe it or not, I'm actually in here, so they're actually tracking me too. That's good or bad. And if we look at an individual such as Dobby, so we type this information in, and we start to get all the information that we know about Dobby. So we have some basic description of who he is. We have when he was born, what is his technical experience, or what was he good at, maybe some photos of him. And then we have all these things on the right that are mentions of him. So that's the linkages, that's the data that says, okay, he was mentioned in this report, this is his phone number, maybe this is where he lives. This is all in that database. So what we want to do is we want to be able to utilize this to ask some questions of our data, or maybe even populate information. So let's say I am now an intel person at some national organization, and I just got information about another individual in the MLF group. And I can then take this information and say, I want to put this information right on a map. So the OBI database the OBI application takes advantage of our JavaScript API that allows them to put a map directly into their application. So let's just zoom into a location here. And so the information that came to me was, all right, so this individual has just arrived at the Monterey International Airport. So I could say, let's go ahead and create an object. So the idea here is I want to create this object in OBI and show that information updating in the actual dashboard, in the operations dashboard. So I'm going to create a point, and it's going to ask me what kind of information. So it's an observation report, and basic is travel plans. And then what is the activity? Essentially this individual. And then do I know the individual who it is? And it is Moxon. So Moxon's an individual that we're tracking. And then I just update that information. So I have a start time of when this started, when it stopped, and then information then populated. So we'll see in a moment is that information will then change in the operations dashboard to show this information coming in. So if we go back to the dashboard, we have this individual, we have an active count of the surveillance activity that's happening. That widget just automatically updates. So as an ops center, I don't know what's happening, but when this Intel report gets put at the national level, I now know it persists to me because I'm watching this information. If I want to know where this is happening, click on this, and it's at that location that was inputted in. So it's a quick integration of how I'm able to take information from a national level and put it into Ops Center. So that's that operational layer being fed with foundational data down to the Operations Center. That's one example. So another example is what we want to do is we want to take information that's coming in from the field, such as just on a mobile application or something of that sort. So Esri has multiple custom applications to allow you to quickly get started in a mobile environment. An example of that is GeoForm. It's a JavaScript application. It doesn't matter what the platform is. You could be on a handheld, you could be on the web, on a computer, or you can be on a tablet. And essentially it just allows you to ask quick information of your data. One of the things is it's not map-centric. When people are updating information in the field, you don't also always want to say, where are you on the map? You want to just ask some basic questions. So an example is, I have an unknown individual that was seen with 2 other individuals in a particular area moving equipment. So I can take this here. So this is the activity. 2 military-age males, and then just give a basic start and stop time. And this all depends on how I'm situated on my mobile device. This application could use my GPS and say where I'm standing is where I report. Or since we're not in the field and we're doing this in a simulation environment, I could just say, okay, based on this location, that's where this actually happened. So it's near the marina at the wharf. So I input that information, and as that comes up, we'll see that information coming back into the application as well. And it comes there. So this is a great way of we're just putting information in from a mobile environment, doesn't care where it is, but we're all populating this information back to the MarkLogic database. So how this is happening is all based on Geo Event Manager. So Geo Event Manager is a server extension that we have that allows you to configure your inputs and your outputs into what we call these Geo Event services. So a Geo Event service looks like this. So I have a quick ingestion, which is my MarkLogic feature service that's coming in. I get some track information, so I don't make sure I don't replicate data. So if something gets sent on a mobile device or in the OBI database, we're not going to replicate, and it's not going to be this circle. So we understand that every unique layer is, or every feature is unique. And then I just do some field mappings to then populate that out. And this constantly runs, and as these update, I could then see that information, and we see those counts coming through here to say, hey, look, we pushed those features. So that's a critical way that we start to understand how that information flows. So now, if we go back to the operations chief, they have to make decisions based on this. So they know they have a situation, they have this individual that's out in the field, and something happens. And let's say, for instance, that there's a possible of a bomb threat of attack. They want to utilize the standards that are set by the industry to be able to react to this. So National Counterterrorism Organization, they actually populate a standoff distance for evacuating areas and evacuating buildings. So instead of having somebody, which I probably we've all been in a situation where something has a building and someone's trying to draw circles and say, well, we have to evacuate this. We don't want an analyst to do that. We want to take this information and put that in an analysis layer to then be able to populate that information. And so what we have is a custom widget that allows us to do this inside of our dashboard. So as an analyst, all I need to do is say, where is this event happening? And I have an address that I can put in. So I copy that address. I put that address in that information. And then I have that same chart as just a breakdown saying, okay, so if this is a container, and then I run the process. And so this is what it now gives me is critical information about my particular area. So what was happening at my points of interest? So now I've ran this, but tell me within my community, what do I care about? Where are those points of interest? Schools, mosques, churches, government facilities that I care about. And that's what these widgets are. These widgets allow us to see that information. And as I go through here and I start to click these, I start to get some basic information. So is it operational? What's the group and what's the name of that? But that might not be enough. So let's say, for instance, I got to this point, but I want to know a better breakdown of that. How do I utilize some of the custom widgets that come with Operations Dashboard to do that? So I could add a widget. I have the ability to add descriptions, chat messages. But what we want to do is we're going to add a pie chart. And we want to empower that pie chart based on that points of interest feature layer that we're looking at. So we come here and say place of interest selection, and we'll just call this community breakdown. There it is. And I have a few different ways. I just want to get the display feature count. So just the overall count of the different types of features that are possibly in that blast radius. And then if I have all these different things that I could do to the map. So if I click on it, do I want to highlight this area? Do I want to have a pop-up? Do I want to zoom to? And you kind of saw those when I started clicking on the graph. So I have all this stuff. This is all out of the box. So think of that person that traditionally had to go to a system integrator to build this thing and then continue to go back and say, hey, I want this to improve, I want this to improve. They're now able to do some of this just right from their own computer. So now I could dock this in multiple locations. Well, the first thing you'll probably notice is I'm running out of room. And that's because these things are possibly geared towards multiple screens. So you go in these common operation pictures and you have multiple screens up. So we can easily just start to paste widgets in different locations. But the bigger thing now is I get this breakdown of what is going on in my area. So I know I have 13 Christian churches that possibly could be targets or could be issues. I have 4 military locations. And if I just want to get a basic understanding of where these are, I can go back in and I can configure this to say when I click on this, let's just go ahead and highlight. And then I highlight that information. So what we're able to do is we're able to take that foundational data that we're traditionally used to as GIS analysts and marry that with operational information. So we saw those operational feeds coming in real time. We had some widgets that updated information. And then I was able to then make a decision or maybe just give more information to an individual that has to make a decision about what areas of our community is at threat based on the National Counterterrorism bomb threat chart. The idea is that I want to do this all in an application. I also want to ask maybe an intelligent question of my data that wasn't really broken out before. So I can use custom widgets to do that. We all do that by utilizing all that information came from MarkLogic and the information or the applications we have available through the Arcgis Platform. The way we talk about all that stuff is that Geo Event server or Geo Event extension for Arcgis server, which is our server application. So at that point, that is all I have. Let's go back to slides.
We're at the beginning. So at the beginning of the topic, we talked about doing more with your GIS. We talked about being able to see beyond space and time. We do this by being able to bring in data that is in different shapes, expressed as documents, taking advantage of the ability to also organize them as entities and objects. When you look at what we've done, we've provided users with an ability to do faceted search, to be able to build intelligence product, bring it into a GIS capability, and visualize it in a number of different ways by leveraging information that was both in MarkLogic and in other areas. We're doing this by implementing an operational, MarkLogic is an operational data hub. We're able to bring this information in a dynamic way, index the hell out of it, expose it as RESTful services. It decouples the modernization from the imperative of having to end of life those systems. So you actually can extend legacy systems. And it stages everything for search, alerting, and so forth. We are able to bring this information in and share it with disconnected users in the field at different echelons. And we're able to work with entities and objects in a very granular way. So I appreciate your time here with us today, and we do have time for questions.
I'm not sure the right way to ask it, but kind of what's the level of effort for implementing some of the other tools with custom applications, other things besides working with OBI?
Okay.
Yeah, so the question was...
Yep. The question was, what was the level of effort to integrate Esri, ArcGIS, with other kinds of applications that sit on MarkLogic?
Yeah, so it depends. I mean, that's a loaded question. The better way that I think of to answer that is that what do we offer? And what we offer is a very, very robust JavaScript API. We also have a desktop SDK where if you need to traditionally build something in a desktop application using WPF or .NET or anything of that nature, we have various ways to do that. We traditionally see that a lot of things that are happening now is people are very interested in what we offer based on our platform APIs, such as the JavaScript API for web or even our portal for ArcGIS. So if you want to populate information directly into our portal that can be searched and discovered. We didn't talk about that today, but we saw all of the intricate parts around that portal that you have to be able to access those custom applications. And if you want to have more information, I would love to talk to you about that afterwards and get into maybe the finer details. But I would say that there's some possibility of integration, and sometimes it's easy as just populating information to the portal, which is just storing the data, storing the reference to the data, and then utilizing a custom application that we've already built. Or it might be something even more defined where we have to get developers involved to do that. So we have both ways, it just depends. Thank you for your question.
I'm trying to understand the Geo Event server and this connection between MarkLogic and ArcGIS server. So first, can you summarize Geo Event server, but also can you tell us who's pushing or who's pulling?
Yeah, so Geo Event server allows us to do a few things with inputs and outputs. We can input information via like a JSON request, which is that's what they're utilizing our server API to create a feature service on their end. We read that information in as an input through JSON. We then populate that JSON to our information to allow us to feed it, and then when something happens, we do field mapping and then populate that information back. So the intricate part of that allows us to do it is they have enabled our feature service capability through OBI. Does that make sense?
So Mark, in this case, it's Geo Event's pulling the MarkLogic database to get the data in and it's doing analysis. It can receive push updates as well. So Geo Event's a generic real-time analysis system for doing applying geographic processing on streaming data. You know, a lot of different kinds of inputs. In the case of interfacing with MarkLogic, the Geo Event system is pulling the MarkLogic database to get updates. It's bringing those updates in, it's applying geographic analysis tools on it, and then it's either pushing it back to with enriched data back to MarkLogic or pushing it out to other clients. Does that answer the question?
So that's my boss, by the way.